Our next speakers are going to speak on Common Tern Research and Restoration. Dr. Lee Harper came to the North Country as a college student after spending a summer in Chippewa Bay doing field work with colonial water birds for the winter navigation studies in 1978. He knew the river was someplace he wanted to be. After his graduate studies on the effects of forest fragmentation in the Brazilian Amazon, he returned to the river and has been active in colonial water bird work and threatened and endangered species conservation for over 30 years. During these efforts, Lee and his team have banded 45,000 common terns. When not working with birds, Lee is often doing freshwater mussel surveys. He lives on the river upstream of the Moses Saunders Power Dam. Lee's been a friend and a mentor of mine for many years, so we're lucky to have him here today to speak to us. And Jim McGarry. Jim grew up in Rochester, New York, and first came to the river in 1957 when his family spent some vacation time at the Oak Point Inn. It was 2 seasons later that he first got to see salties traversing the seaway. For many, many years, Jim rented riverfront cottages until he and his wife got their own place on the river looking straight out at Crossover Island. Since his retirement in 2009, he has been active in several environmental efforts and organizations, including Save the River. He has served 6 years on the Tompkins County Environmental Management Council. He's also served 5 years on the Tompkins County Water Resources Council. He has now spent 12 seasons managing 2 tern colonies on channel markers as part of Save the River's Tern project. So Lee and Jim, come on up.
All right. Now. Mouse. Okay. Now I got it. Okay. As you've heard, I've been farming terns for some time. And I want to share with you what tern farmers actually do, as well as what the terns are up to in the meantime. It's a timely topic for us at STR, since we just happen to be looking for a few more tern farmers. So if you've thought of participating in the Tern program, here's a chance to see just what you might be getting into. According to the International Ornithological Congress, there are 40 species of terns in the world. They live all around the world. Here in the Thousand Islands, we probably only see 3 of them. Common terns, today's subject, Caspian terns that are quite a bit larger and crested, and black terns, usually seen, if at all, back in marshy areas. There it is. Huh? It's a little touchy. There it is. There are the 2 colonies that we handle, 180 and 156. 156 is just downstream of Crossover Island, so it's actually within view of our place. And 180 is just across the channel from Ironsides Island. These nap cells are 27 feet in diameter. That's it. That's what you got. And that translates to about 550 square feet of nesting space. So let's start in April. What are terns doing? Well, they're flying north. They're coming, in many cases, over 1,000 miles from places around the Gulf of Mexico. Tern farmers, well, we're repairing winter damage, and you're going to get to see some. We redistribute the gravel, we remove dead birds and collect any marking bands that are on them, and we make sure there's no osprey, gull, or geese nesting activity. They can't live in tern colonies. And we set up colony cams so that we can get some images. So here we arrive in April. As you can see, Things are not in good order. Those fences smashed down all over the place. None of them are where they belong. The plastic fences is ripped. All the shelters have been shoved to the back of the marker. We have to get there before the birds do, because once they arrive, you can't do this kind of work. So this is what it looked like when we arrived. And there's the other side of the marker. You can see the fence is blown down by high waves coming over the top of it. That fence across in the front of us doesn't belong anywhere near there. That's what it looks like. So after several hours, and I can't tell you how many zip ties, it looks like this. We got the fences back up, the shelters laid out. And there's the other side of the marker, and you can see that fence that had been blown down is back up now. That's where all the zip ties went. Now, these shelters, a word about these shelters. They were developed specifically for STR's Tern Restoration project. They went through several design iterations, but in the end, the Terns picked that. Now, this design has gained some broader headway in the bird world. You will find instructions on how to build these shelters on Cornell University's Lab of Ornithology website. As it happens, somebody at the Lab of O was on my Tern report mailing list. I didn't even know it. So last time I looked, that design had been downloaded over 700 times. So it seems that there's other folks in the world who feel the need of shelters for ground nesters. Now, in April, when we first go out there, the water's cold. There we are, suited up, full wetsuits. The water's 42 degrees. Dangerous cold. I recommend thermal protection. I also recommend you don't go alone. So now we go to May. Here the terns get busier. They are here. They arrive. They claim nest territories. They lay eggs in what's called a scrape. They don't really build nests. They incubate their eggs and they feed themselves and their partners. Okay. What do? Tern farmers? We go out there and we count and report nest eggs and nest numbers, egg numbers, and ultimately chick numbers. And we watch out for signs of predation or trespass. Here's a bit on claiming territories. The bird on the right claimed a spot underneath one of the shade wings of the shelters, and the bird on the left seemed to want that spot for itself. In this case, it came to fisticuffs. Now, in May, these terns are busy, and I try to get out there every 10 days, if I can, to take a census. They do like to have some space. They are territorial, as you can see in that picture. And the shelters do seem to enable them to nest more closely. They're more comfortable because of those shelters. There was a scrape. There it is. You can hardly see it. It's just a tiny bit of a dish in the substrate. That's it. And they drop their eggs in that. There's eggs in a scrape in a prime spot. You can see the shade from the side wing of that shelter approaching the eggs even as this picture got taken. And you can also see the tern's preferred shelter use. Look at that image. On the right, I think you can see it, there's a 3-egg nest under the right wing. There's a 3-egg nest under the left wing. There's a 3-egg nest right behind the shelter. If that shelter were not there, those 3 nests wouldn't be that close. This is their preferred use of those shelters. Why do I keep getting these things? There's a scrape up against a log. They got something against their back. They like that. They also use the edges of the nacelle. They go up against those and drop their eggs there. They do seem to like to have something at their back. Now, here we have a picture of them incubating. As you can see, it's just a whole lot of sitting around because they got to keep those eggs warm. Now, I can't quite see the temperature. What does the temperature say? 52. Okay. You couldn't let those eggs get that cold. And there's a bonus ship in the background here. This is a night picture. There's more incubating on the other nacelle, sitting all over the place. And this is only 7th of May. I get eggs on the ground typically by May 3 or 4. So by the 7th or 8th, that's what you see in the colony. And that pair on the railing there, they seem to still be negotiating. Mate feeding. Somebody's got to bring home the bacon. So one partner sits on the eggs, the other goes fishing. As it happens, females sit more and fish less. Males fish more and sit less, but they both share the duties. Now on the left, a bird incubating a nest. On the right, its partner arrives and gives it a fish. Trespassers. This is a big topic. The trespassers I worry about most are geese, osprey, and gulls. Geese sometimes build nests up on nacelles. I can't let them stay there. Osprey often, and I'm sure everyone here has seen this, build nests up on the towers. And they won't eat terns typically, but if you're a tern, you're not staying there. Not when you look up and you see a hawk. You're leaving. So we got to get those osprey off the towers. We got to get the geese out of the colony. I've also found a gull nest once in a colony, and gulls are predators. They'll eat the tern eggs. Can't let them stay there. So we throw their nests in the river. And as it happens, the Seaway even appreciates some of this. We keep their towers clear, and they do need to go up there from time to time and do some work. A large osprey nest is very inconvenient. Now, the pair of geese you see there, I had evicted just 2 days before. They came back to the marker a couple of nights after that, but eventually abandoned it. And ducks. Sometimes ducks nest up on nacelles. They get along fine with terns, and terns like ducks too, so it's fine. Everybody's happy. But ducklings have to get to water very quickly after they hatch. They can't get there if they're up on a nacelle. They're going to die. So, my current view is that if I find a duck nest and it only has 1 or 2 eggs in it, I'm throwing it over. I want that duck to find a better place. Now, it turns out, this flipped on me. It turns out that in 5 years of my time doing this, I have found duck nests. 2 of those 5 years, we correctly predicted the hatch date. And we got there, and we picked up all those ducklings, and we put them in a bucket. Carried them down, got in the boat, and shoved off the marker. Ma and Pa duck knew exactly where their ducklings were. So once they could see us and we could see them, we just poured the ducklings into the river, and they all got back together and headed off. Now that's great. But 3 out of 5 times, they just died. So my preference now is if I find an incomplete duck nest, I think I'm getting rid of it. I want those ducks to go to a safer place. And there's how I count nests, eggs, and chicks. I put a paper map of the cell and exactly where the fences are and exactly where the shelters are. I put that on a clipboard and I just go up there and draw circles for every nest, put numbers in for every egg, and I do my counting later. Every minute I spend in that colony is a minute they can't be doing what they have to do. So now we're in June. The eggs hatch, the chicks grow. Come on. And the adult terns have to work even harder now. Not only do they have to feed their partner, but they got to feed 3 kids. So if you sit off those markers in June, say early June, and you just sit off 100 yards and just watch with binoculars, you won't be able to count how many fish are coming into that colony. They're coming in so fast and so often because they got to feed a lot of birds. Now in our colonies, we sometimes have 140 nests. That's about 500 birds when you count all the chicks. That's a lot of fish. So it's busy. And we count the nests, the eggs and the chicks, and then we band them before they can fly. A key item. Now, here they come. It's hard for me to read the dates on that. But on the right, you can see a whole egg, and to that left, a broken egg with a wet chick with its head still in the top half of the egg. And to the left of that, a fluffy chick that probably hatched a half a dozen hours before I got there. So this is it. This is birthday. And on the left, you see a chick there panting. His mouth is open. The temperature reading there says 101 Fahrenheit. On a hot summer day with good sun, those chicks can die out on those markers if they don't have shade. And here we are on our way to band. That's our boat with the yellow top. The terns know it well. And you can see in the sky above us as we approach the marker, all the terns are on the wing. And it's a poop storm. and they do this for our boat. They know our boat. I could be 150 yards away, and they dread. Because they know I'm coming up there. And then we band. On the left, I think that's me. I recognize my poop hat. And I'm putting a band on a chick. And on the right is Dr. Harper and Lauren conferring on banding technique. And both 156 and 180 have been extremely productive colonies, yielding on each colony north of 150 banded chicks for 10 years straight now. Now, I'm not sure if you can see it that well, but on the right foot of this incoming bird, there's a band. Right there. These bands are mighty important. They yield data. They're serialized. If we find that band, we can find out in a database what species it is, how old it was, where it was born, tons of data. So if you ever find a band on a dead bird, tern or otherwise, go to reportband.gov and follow the instructions and put in those numbers. That's important data. Now, owls. This is something you can't protect the terns from out on the markers. There's a great horned owl. This is, I think, 2012. Yeah. We lost a whole colony that year. All of it. All of it. That owl kept coming back night after night until the adults abandon the colony. And when the adults abandon, the chicks all die. It was a terrible scene. And this is the evidence of owl predation. A bit grisly, I suppose. But on the left, you see just a wing. On the right, you see just a head. That's what owls do when they catch a tern or any number of other birds. They rip the wings off. There's nothing to eat there. And they rip the head off and they take the body. And we did make an attempt to capture that owl. I built this raptor trap. And you can see on the left it's open and there's a stick across the middle that is just barely bent, just barely. You drop about 3 ounces on that stick and it drops out of the way and the trap snaps shut like on the right. The owl was too smart for us. We actually didn't catch him. Now we're into July. In July, chicks learn to fly and they learn to catch fish. Tern farmers, stay out of the way. Just leave them, let them do what they do. Now you can see in this picture the reason why we have to get out there early enough. On the right is a young bird. He doesn't have a full black cap. He has a gray cap. That's young of the year. On the left, same thing. But look at those wings. They're ready to go. And I think the date on that is June 21. So if we did our jobs correctly that year, we got there about 5 days before this. Because at this point, they can get lift. And if you go up there, they're afraid of you, they're going to try to get away, they'll get lift, they'll get blown off the marker. But they can't really quite fly yet. So we call those jumpers. You got to go get them. You got to get in a boat, go out there with a fishing net, scoop them out of the river and bring them back. We have had to do some of that, but we try hard to pick a date that's early enough that we don't get that effect. So we don't have to go chasing jumpers and bring them back. Now we get to August and September. The terns pack up and leave. The kids have been through flight school, they've been through fishing school, and they're ready to go. Tern farmers clean up the colonies, pull weeds, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute, and repair the shelters, repair the fences, whatever we need to do to get that colony back into good shape. Navcell 156 is a little different. Most of the pictures you've seen have been on 180. It doesn't grow the crop of weeds that you see here on 156. Those weeds are taller than I am. They're trees. But of course, they have some pretty good fertilizer because they're growing in a bird colony. Now, these weeds might seem like a problem, but what we have learned is we don't need shelters. These weeds provide the shade the chicks need. And at the same time, because they get so big and thick, they provide protection from avian predators. Now, I have a couple of sequences to show you here. I have cameras that I put out there, and cameras that I have snap 3 photos in 2 seconds. So I'm going to show you a mate feeding sequence. 1, 2, 3. Let's do it again. On the left, you see the adult calling for a fish and the chick just behind the adult. That's under the shade wing of the shelter. There's the fish. Direct delivery. Now, this is what they do. And they'll do that same bird will go back out and get another one and bring it back and give it to the chick. And a dread sequence. the dread that I pointed out when they saw our boat. Here's a dread sequence up close. Where is first picture, second picture, third picture. Look at that colony. In 2 seconds flat, it's empty. And you don't even see chicks. Because when the adults take off scared, the chicks go into the shelters. So that colony empties out in a hurry. It's a good defensive response. A tern on the ground is extremely vulnerable. A tern on the wing is pretty safe. They're really good flyers. And just to make a point there, that is absolutely a goby. Positively a goby. And I see a lot of this in my photos. My cameras take thousands of photos every week. And, just a bit of nice news, the Seaway has granted STR permission to investigate the possibility of creating an additional colony on Nassau 160. This effort will begin in April. I'd love 160. It's a quarter mile from 156, and I could practically swim there from our dock. So that would be great. But I don't know what I'm going to find when I get there. I may find an osprey nest that's active and there's eggs in it up top. We'd be done. I would climb down off the marker and leave. We can take care of that nest in the fall. When those birds have fledged and they've gone, I can climb up there and tear that nest apart and throw it in the river without sacrificing any eggs. Then the following spring, the osprey will discover that their terrific nest is just not there anymore. So I needn't worry about eggs, because they're not going to do that unless they have a nest to put them in. And I get there early enough in April that if they started to rebuild the nest, I could intercept that before they got enough of it done. We also have to find out when we get up there in the spring, do we have the substrate we need? We may not. We may need to haul in several tons of gravel. We shall see. And this is just a good night from a tern. And Lee?
That was a great look at what a tern farmer does. Thank you, Jim. And Jim really has been probably the longest serving tern farmer on the river. You've been at it a long time, and we really appreciate your efforts. I think, Jim, you won the Friend of the River Award last year in part for your efforts on the Common Tern project. I've got 10 slides to give you a little bit of the bigger picture, sort of put things together. Jim gave you a good overview of what we do day in and day out. Terns are a threatened species in New York. They're habitat limited, and it's important that we manage them as best we can to keep them around. So we do adaptive management. We learn from our mistakes. We try and adapt to new situations as they arise. This is a cell downriver. You can see this particular one has galvanized steel plate around it, and that's because it's lower than most of the cells and gets more damage from winter storms. So we got tired of replacing that gravel over and over and over again, and we went to this steel plate perimeter. Above the steel plate, you see just a simple piece of nylon rope, and that prevents cormorants from perching on these sites. Very simple. It's just a little piece of rope, but the cormorants can't sit on it. They could sit on the steel, and they did. So as Jim showed you, they're the chicks. The whole idea is get these eggs, provide the habitat, allow the birds to lay eggs, get these eggs to hatch, let the chicks grow up, fledge, fly to Central South America, come back at age 3 to breed again on the St. Lawrence River. So here's some of the challenges in the next slide. It's hard to be a tern.
Jim pointed out the osprey at the top center and the top right. That picture in the top right is actually Jim's navigation cell before he took charge of it. Osprey nested right on the tern gravel. Very frustrating. And once an osprey gets there, they can be hard to discourage. Again, we use passive exclusion rather than any other means. So terns compete for space with geese, ospreys, and gulls on the right side of your screen there. At the top, osprey, goose, and gull. Their eggs are eaten by gulls and geese, as a matter of fact, and by mink. Those are the predators of eggs. The chicks and adults are eaten by peregrine falcons, great horned owls, and mink. Every picture there was taken in a St. Lawrence River tern colony with the exception of the mink. Luckily, the peregrines seem to have moved on. Next slide. So those are the challenges, and here are some of the potential solutions. The next few slides are things we did just 6 months ago in the summer of 2022. We started to experiment with elevated nesting platforms. This idea was really developed by Liz Craig at the time at Cornell at Oneida Lake. She's now at Isle of Shoals and University of New Hampshire. This is an old dock, an aluminum dock. It's actually my dock. And we put this dock out on an island downriver in the spring. It's the dock panels are underneath there. Olivia is walking on it. And we put some geotextile fabric down, basically create a bathtub, a fence around it, add the gravel using 5-gallon pails. It is a little bit of work. And then in the upper right picture, you can see we've added chick shelters and driftwood. And there Olivia is banding the chicks. These structures they're not very big. This thing's only, I think this one is 6 feet wide. So we don't get a ton of nests. But what we've seen is that we're avoiding predators. The black-crowned night herons or great blue herons don't land in these. The mink don't climb up there, and the gulls don't land in them either. So they have very high productivity. They also serve as anchors for this particular island. Terns typically, if they get hit by owls or mink, they'll abandon that island in the following year. And then it'll take a year or two for them to come back. Because these structures are successful every year, it anchors the colony, and they will come back the following year. So we have had nests on the island itself next to these structures depredated by gulls and mink, but these have never been hit. So keep an eye out for your neighbor's dock or somebody's dock that doesn't want it anymore, and let's experiment with some more of these. I think there's some spots up here in the Thousand Islands where they may work pretty well. That's one potential solution. Another one, which was also new, the next slide, in 2022, is an electric perch. If those owls are coming into these colonies and hitting them, maybe we can dissuade them, encourage them to go somewhere else. So this structure is actually one of the ice boom cells next to the Ogdensburg-Prescott Bridge. It's actually owned by the New York Power Authority, and so it's easy for us to get permission to do this kind of work there. It's just 2x2 lumber. We have 220 linear feet of 2x2 lumber that's electrified. And it's just a Tractor Supply fence charger. Actually, the one I bought's a little better than that, but that's really all it is, battery operated with a solar panel. There's a single hot wire, 14 or 17 gauge galvanized fencing wire down the center of that 2x2. The two corners are cut off, and there's a ground wire on each side. So there's one hot, two grounds. In the lower right corner, you can see a tern sitting happily on that hot wire. His foot's not big enough, his or her foot's not big enough to complete the circuit and get a shock. But a cormorant, a heron, an owl will get a shock and leave the site. This site did very well in 2022, really encouraging. We don't have pictures of the owls getting shocks. Some of my colleagues, actually in Canada, do. But it seemed to work really well. We're probably going to do another site in 2023 based on the first results of 2022. So that's pretty exciting. That's something we hadn't tried before. Again, the folks up at Presque Isle Provincial Park on the North Shore of Lake Ontario developed this, and I totally copied it. Next slide. Another thing we did in 2022, this is actually a DEC project with funding from the Natural Resource Damage Assessment funds. They wanted to move gravel to an island, Murphy Island off of Waddington. So we put their gator in my boat, we took the gator out, and then we took out tons of gravel in barrels and put down geotextile fabric, distributed the gravel, both to exclude gulls from this particular site, but it is a historic tern nesting site as well. So the idea is maybe down the road, if we can get the gulls under control, this might be a future tern nesting site. This is another thing we could do up here in the Thousand Islands. We've got it down pretty well now, moving lots of tons of barrels in a boat. We can do it. There are a few sites where this might be a real option up here as well. Next slide is rafts and barges. The Tern raft in the upper left-hand corner is a Canadian Wildlife Service design. Frankly, we've never gotten it to work well on the St. Lawrence, partly because it attracts picnickers. Curious people go over there. This is near the Ogdensburg Bridge, and it hasn't done well. At the start of 2022, it had 14 nests. It was the most nests we've ever had on it. We were really hopeful they did not hatch. The two pictures on the right side of this slide are from 2022 on a barge in Buffalo Harbor. Actually, right outside of Station Buffalo, Coast Guard Station Buffalo. These are two 10 by 40 foot flexi floats pinned together. They've got gravel on top. You can see the number of terns nesting on it in the top right photo. You look at the bottom photo, it might be a little hard to see, but the density of nests on this raft, on this barge rather, is higher than anything we've ever had on the St. Lawrence River. There are 261 tern nests on this raft when I took this photo on May 21st, 2022. That's my crew. We go out and the project is actually a DEC project, but we go out and assist with it. So barges are potentially a real boon to providing new nesting habitat for terns. These barges are rented from a construction firm. I believe the cost is about $20,000 per year, and the plan is to do this for 5 years. And the next slide is sort of the good news. We very closely monitor 15 colonies downstream of Ogdensburg, and in 2022, we had 1.92 chicks fledged per nest on average in those colonies. That level of productivity has only been met or exceeded 4 times in 32 years. So the last 2-3 years, as you can see from that graph, we've had good weather, we've had warm, dry summers, and the terns in general at some sites that are highly managed with electric fences and so forth have done very, very well. As I think John mentioned and Jim mentioned, the 2 sites that Jim manages intensively have also done very, very well. Those are the rock stars of this end of the river. And then some of the other sites have not done quite so well. But we're on a roll here. We're producing a lot of chicks, about 1,000 to 1,500 chicks per year on the St. Lawrence River. So the next slide, the question comes up, where do these chicks go? Well, as Jim pointed out, they're all banded. We banded over 1,000 chicks, well, actually over 1,400 chicks on the St. Lawrence River last year. And they migrate to the Caribbean, Central America, South America. At age 2 or 3, usually age 3, they come back and start to breed. We know that most chicks from band returns come back to the St. Lawrence and breed where they hatched. We do have some really interesting band returns, though. Look at the one in the upper left. We have a tern chick hatched on the St. Lawrence sitting on eggs in Ashland, Wisconsin. There's not much St. Lawrence Seaway left beyond Ashland, Wisconsin. That's about as far upstream as you can go. We also have one bird that moved to Monomoy Island off Cape Cod, which is very rare. The DNA crunchers have demonstrated that there's a little bit of genetic interchange between the coast and the Great Lakes, but it's not a lot. This really firmly demonstrated that it does occur, and not frequently, but this was a documented case where an adult was sitting on eggs, trapped on the nest, was banded by us on the St. Lawrence. We've known forever that we export birds to Presque Isle Provincial Park on the north shore of Lake Ontario, Papasquash Island on Lake Champlain, the north end of Lake Champlain. Mark Labar from Vermont Audubon trapped birds on the nest 5 years in a row, and every year caught a bird that was banded on the St. Lawrence. and of course Oneida Lake as well. We know our birds are going there from band returns. So I think I've got one more slide. No, two more. If you have a good spotting scope, binoculars, or a good camera and like to take pictures, this is really interesting. Cal Hansen in Cornwall found a place where terns courtship feed on the railing of a bridge on the Long Sault Parkway. And he discovered he can drive by very slowly with his camera and shoot a whole series of photographs of a band on a bird's leg. He then painstakingly goes through all those photos and pieces together the band number. And he then, even, as Jim said, to go to reportband.gov, he emails those band numbers in. They didn't want to accept the records. They didn't believe him because he's got birds that were banded in salt water on the coast showing up on the St. Lawrence River. Now, we've never confirmed that one of these saltwater birds is nesting here, but this is fascinating. It's a real riddle. I'd like to pursue this a little bit more. You know, we know like bald eagles, some of the bald eagles you see on the St. Lawrence River in July and August, they fledged from Florida. And the Florida birds do this weird northward movement where they come up and visit us in the summer and fall, and then they may go back to Florida. We seem to have something similar happening with terns. We get these saltwater birds. We think they're coming up here during courtship. We don't know that they're nesting. Maybe they go back down. But just fascinating, and that takes a lot of patience, believe me, to piece all those band numbers together. Really, really fascinating. And then the last slide is the good news. In 25 years, actually, we've got data that goes back, you know, into the late 80s, early 90s. But around 1998, where this graph starts, we had about 500 nesting pairs on the St. Lawrence River as a whole. We got up to almost triple that at one point. We lost a little bit of habitat and some navigation cells at the request of Seaway. They kind of said, well, we don't really want you here that much. And now we're down to about 1,000, 1,100 nesting pairs from the St. Lawrence River. So in the last 25 years, with a lot of work, a lot of people involved, including some of you in this room, we have doubled the population on the St. Lawrence River. We're a long way from what used to be here historically, but we've made tremendous amount of progress. And that's in part due to your encouragement and your support. So thank you very much.
Any question for these two tern farmers? Back to Don. Don, somebody's bringing you a microphone.
Go ahead, Joe.
Lee, Jim mentioned earlier about trespassing birds. What about trespassing humans?
I have not seen evidence of human trespass on the markers. I've always been worried about it, but I've never seen evidence that convinces me it happened. Now that's good, of course, but I found an awful lot of fishing tackle up there.
And an occasional beer bottle, too.
I think there was another question over here.
Yes.
You know, there's cormorants have got a lot of bad news, bad flack by the angry community and other community. Are these terms, could they be receivers of similar types of animosity as, you know, they're feeding on fish, or what differentiates the two? And what role do they play in the ecosystem?
Yeah. No, you, please. The first one, for starters. The big concern over cormorants was that they were eating game fish. The diet studies, you know, we used to collect the pellets. The cormorants regurgitate up a pellet. We collected them for a long time. USGS collected them for a long time. DEC still does, I believe. And the percentage in the diet of game fish is relatively low. It's now almost zero. And the reason is cormorants are eating 85% gobies. They're like everybody. The bass are eating gobies. The walleye are eating gobies. So are the birds. And so, you know, certainly what we've seen, and I do some work with American eel, eels are growing at much faster rates now. They used to sexually mature at or they used to out-migrate out of the St. Lawrence system at age 20, 12. Now it's down to 7. And it's because they're eating so many gobies, they're becoming sexually mature earlier, and they're out-migrating at a much younger age. Fish rates are all through the roof because of gobies, and terns, as Jim's slide showed, they're eating gobies as well. Terns don't eat game fish like cormorants are thought to. Terns are eating, we've never seen a walleye up in a colony, for example. You sometimes see a little bit of perch, but it's mostly shiners and minnows. As for what role they play in the ecosystem, I think that's more of a personal judgment call. I think my life's a little richer having them around, and I think, Jim, maybe you feel the same way, but I understand completely that not everybody does. All right, well, gentlemen, thank you very much. And thank all of you.